June 5 p.m. American Methodist Mission at Sunhua, with 12 children and 4 women, are beset and have wired for help. Trains from Tientsin have ceased to arrive. We are sending a courier overland with mails. June 6. United States Consul at Tientsin has wired the minister here that the Tientsin native city is in great excitement, and the situation is very serious. He advised that no women or children attempt to enter Tientsin from Peking, as they could not get through. Fate of Paoding few missionaries unknown, as we can get no telegrams through. June 6 p.m. United States Consul wires from Tientsin that the situation there is growing steadily worse. An attack is imminent. Here in Peking we are all collecting in the legations, but have insufficient arms and ammunition. Nevertheless, we will make a determined stand. June 7th. I have overwhelming evidence that government officials are the real causes of the Boxer movement, acting under the direction of the Empress. Therefore that Sun Liamen and Cabinet are supporting this movement, which is intended to exterminate all foreigners and Christian converts. The senile Cabinet has persuaded the Empress this is possible, and they are quite willing to face the inevitable foreign war that their policy entails. The imbecility of this idea does not in any way interfere with the facts. The foreign powers should all prepare for war at once, or entrust the work to those powers nearest and best fitted to successfully undertake it. The sooner this is done, the less will be the loss of life and property. That Sun Liamen yesterday promised Sir Claude MacDonald, through the Secretary of Prince Ching, that if the foreign ministers would not press for a personal audience with the Empress, as they intended doing, Prince Ching would guarantee the restoration of the interrupted railway in 2 days, and a general amelioration of the condition of affairs. Another useless edict was put out today mildly enjoining officials to distinguish between good and bad Boxers, and punish only the bad. June 7th, p.m. 20 converts have been murdered at Huangsun, 13 miles south. Missionaries at Tungchao have decided to abandon their valuable compound, and have telegraphed the United States minister to send them a guard of Marines to escort the women and children to Peking. This compound contains a valuable college, and will inevitably be burned. Hu Yong I beheaded August Ni, Maiden Hunala. Wang Wenshao, Chao Shu Chao Boxer Chief, Conger Yu S. Minister, Yukon Minister to Paris. A group in front of the American legation June 8th. Tungchao missionaries have arrived safely in Peking. 2 other stations on the Tientsin Railway, Lofa and Langfang, have been burned, as well as the college compound at Tungchao. Sun Liamen has refused to allow a reinforcement of the legation guards now in Peking. Although 30 warships of all nationalities are at Taku, Peking is completely isolated. Why America, after Secretary Hayes' much vaunted open-door policy, should allow her representative to be denied sufficient guard for the safety of himself and his countrymen is something one cannot comprehend, unless the representative has not kept his government well informed. June 8th, p.m. Most alarming situation. Missionaries from all compounds in this city compelled to abandon their homes and seek refuge in the Methodist Mission, which is nearer the legations, being a half-mile east of the United States legation. They have a few shotguns and very little ammunition, and are surrounded by their terrified converts, who have fled with them. Prince Ching's promise of restored railway has proved false. The foreign ministers now realize they have been fooled again, and have lost 2 days' valuable time. We call upon our government to make haste and rescue our wives and families quickly, or it will be too late. June 9th, Emperor and Empress return today to the city from the Summer Palace. Another feudal edict has been put out to further delude the foreign ministers. It is known that Prince Ching has expostulated with the cabinet, but to no purpose. June 9th, p.m. United States Minister Conger has sent in all 20 Marines to assist the Methodist Mission compound in their defense. Still no word from Paoding few missionaries. June 10th, 500 Marines and sailors left Tientsin to relieve us. They can get as far as Antiing 20 miles south of here by train, and will then have to march the remainder of the distance. If prompt, they should arrive tomorrow. Methodist Mission is fortifying the place with strong brick walls and barbed wire. After this telegram, I was notified that the wires south were cut, and sent only one message more on July 12th by way of Kyaukta, relating the murder of the Japanese secretary and urging prompt government action looking to our rescue. The history of the growth of the Boxer movement seems to me to have been clearly shown by these telegrams, so that anyone of ordinary understanding could have been, by June 1st, if in possession of this series of dispatches, fully acquainted with the situation. The United States minister, the British minister, and the French minister were each acquainted with all the above major facts and much more minor detail. Chapter 4 Diary of the author from June 1st to June 20th. Chao Sijao Boxer member of cabinet. The following transcription of my diary gives the principal events in the situation up to the date of the close siege, going back a little in point of time from the last chapter. June 1st. After 3 days of exciting mental strain, we can at last breathe easier. Rumors continue to fill the air of plots within the palace. Riots against the Catholic cathedral, railway being torn up between here and Tientsin, etc. But the solid fact remains that a few foreign guards have arrived at 6 legations, and a machine gun will now have something to say in one's behalf if the excited populace's thirst for foreign blood becomes too pressing. With the exception of M. Pichon, the French minister, all the other ministers are greatly to blame for their tardy recognition of the impending trouble, and they have very nearly had the odium of a preventable foreign massacre to answer for. Sir Claude MacDonald, for whom the entire English community outside his legation feel, and have openly expressed the greatest contempt, would not believe that there was any danger coming, and vigorously opposed Pichon's advice that the troops be sent for 10 days ago. Mr. Conger seconded Sir Claude, partly because the United States legation quarters are so limited that the second secretary and his wife are obliged to live in 2 rooms over the main office building, and partly because he believed the government willing and capable of putting down the disorder. Both were suddenly converted when Fong Tai, only 6 miles away, was burned, and the Boxers were reported marching unopposed upon Peking. Then the most exciting telegraphing for warships to come to Taku, and guards and machine guns to come to Peking, became the order of the day. Had the Boxers been at all organized, they could have torn up the track for a mile or 2 at Fong Tai, and effectually cut off the troops from arriving in time to prevent any city riots. Fortunately, they seem to have been carried away by the desire to loot, and after they had carried off all the furniture and belongings of the 8 foreign residences at Fong Tai, and robbed the Emperor's private car of all movable property, they were content to set fire to the stations and machine shops, and then clear out home to the adjoining villages. June 4th. None of the Boxers have been punished, and they have grown bolder, burning the next station below Fong Tai, known as Huangsun, 13 miles from Peking, killing 2 Church of England missionaries named Robinson and Norman at Yongqing, and defeating a force of Cossacks sent out from Tientsin to search for the surviving Belgians escaping from the Luhan Railway. In spite of this, and with 17 men of war at Tonku, the foreign ministers, besides bringing up each a guard of 50 or 75 men to protect his own legation, are doing nothing, that we can see at any rate, to pacify the country. Why they don't land a large force, come to Peking, and seize the old reprobates that they all know are the real bosses of the Boxer movement in Peking, and hold them responsible for any further movement, nobody knows. Every minister can tell you that Su Tung, Kang Yi, Chung Li, Chung Chi, and Chao Shu Chao with Prince Tuan are the real causes of all the present disorder. Although they all know this, they still pretend to believe the assurances of the government to the contrary. June 13th. Events have been too exciting to allow of one sitting down quietly to write. The missionaries from Tungchao, 13 miles south of Peking, have fled into the city, and all their college plant, private residences, and property have been destroyed by soldiers sent from the Taotai's Yamen to protect them. All the Peking missionaries have gathered together in the Methodist mission compound, where, with such arms as they could collect, a few shotguns, rifles, and revolvers, and with a guard of 20 Marines, sent by Mr. Conger, United States Minister, they have fortified themselves with barbed wire and brick fences, and are holding the fort. For days we have heard no word from our Presbyterian missionaries at Paodingfu. The last word, now some days since, which came through the Tsun Liamen and is therefore untrustworthy, was that they were safe at present. Wires south have been cut since the burning of the college buildings at Tungchao, and I have been unable to write home the developments daily occurring. On the 10th of June, just before the wires were cut, we had a message from United States Consul Ragsdale, saying 800-odd troops were coming to our assistance, but today is the 4th day since its receipt, and we only know of their reaching Lofa, a burn station on the railway to Tientsin on Monday night. We have been expecting them every hour since, but no definite word of their arrival at any other place has reached us. Why they don't send natives in advance we can't imagine. June 18th. 11 days we have been besieged in Legation Street. Our little guard of 450 Marines and sailors of all nationalities have kept unceasing watch night and day, and are nearly exhausted. 11 days ago we were told that an army was marching to our relief, and although they had only 8 miles to come we have not yet seen them, nor do we know their whereabouts. We have nightly repelled attacks of Boxers and soldiers of the government, and have killed in sorties over 200 of them. But we have millions about us, and unless relieved must soon succumb. Our messengers to the outside world have been captured and killed, and our desperate situation, while it may be guessed, cannot be truly known. With 50 men of war now at Taku, we have to remain within our barricaded streets and witness the destruction of all the mission premises and private foreign residences on the outside. The American Board Mission's large property, the 2 large Catholic cathedrals known as the South Cathedral and the East Cathedral, the 2 compounds of the American Presbyterian Mission, the Society for Propagation of the Gospel Mission, the International Institute, and the London Mission have all furnished magnificent conflagrations which we have beheld without being able in any way to prevent. At each place the furious Boxers, aided by their soldier sympathizers, have murdered, with shocking mutilation, all the gatekeepers as well as any women and children in the neighborhood suspected of being Christians or foreign sympathizers. At the South Cathedral the massacre was shocking. So much so that when some of the poor mutilated children came fleeing across the city, bringing the news of what was going on, a relief party was organized from our little force, consisting of 12 Russians, 12 American Marines, and 2 civilians, W.N. Peking and M. Duisburg, armed with shotguns, who, risking conflict with the Manchu troops, marched 2 miles from our barricades and, coming on the Boxers suddenly in the midst of the ruins, fired a number of volleys into them, killing over 60, upon which the rest fled. They then collected the women and children hidden in the surrounding alleys, and marched them back to us, where they are for the present safe. I have just finished dressing the wounded head of a little girl 10 years of age, who, in spite of a sword cut 4 inches long in the back of her head and 2 fractures of the outer table of the skull, walked all the way back here, leading a little sister of 8 and a brother of 4. As she patiently endured the stitching of the wound, she described to me the murder of her father and mother and the looting of her home. One old man of 60 carried his mother of 80 upon his back and brought her into temporary safety. But how long before we are all murdered we cannot say. Our anxiety has been something frightful, and at this moment, many days since we were told that troops were coming to our relief, we are apparently no nearer rescue than at first. We can't comprehend it. Night before last, after being driven away by our hot rifle fire, the Boxers turned on the defenseless shopkeepers in the southern city, and burned many acres of the best business places and native banks. They also burned the great city gate, known as the Chien Men, an imposing structure of many stories high, which must have illuminated the surrounding country for miles. Surely our troops must have seen the glare, if they were within 40 miles of us. We begin to fear they have met with an overwhelming force of Chinese soldiers, and have been driven back to Tientsin. That Sun Liamen or Foreign Office is utterly powerless, and yet it continues to send us messages stating it is going to protect us, and it has the Empress issue daily edicts which, while apparently condemning the Boxers, really encourage them. Main Gate to Peking, destroyed by Boxers September 16, 1900. This is one of Peking's main and most imposing gates. Notice the massive building above the wall. Note the solidity of the wall itself. An idea of its great height can be formed by noticing how small a proportion is occupied by the arch and yet how small a proportion of the arch is actually required for the passing vehicles. The Manchu soldiers have stood idly by in thousands, and have seen the frightful butcheries of converts and suspected converts, without raising a finger to interfere. When questioned why they did not obey the edicts authorizing them to repress arson and looting, they have replied, "We have other instructions. Mauser bullets are nightly fired at our sentries, and every night we have to turn out a number of times to repel the cowardly natives, whom we find sneaking down upon us, and who dare attack only under cover of darkness. The behavior of our women and children under these circumstances has been remarkable, and their courage and bravery above all praise." Should these lines ever be published, I wish to make known to the world the great courage, devotion, and constant watchfulness of Captain John T. Myers, of the Marine Corps. We will owe to him our lives and the lives of our loved ones if we are ever rescued. His bravery and endurance will, if he survives, mark him for high command someday. While all the officers here have acted well, yet he is head and shoulders above them in coolness and decision, and all the other nationalities come to him for advice and counsel. He is well seconded here by ex-Lieutenant Herbert G. Squires, 7th United States Cavalry, who is First Secretary of Legation. Had Mr. Squires been minister, we would never have been in our present terrible situation, for he realized the appalling nature of the threatened outbreak while the ministers pooh-poohed it. As he could not of his own initiative order up troops in time, he laid in abundant stores of rice and other eatables, and bought up all the wagons and ammunition purchasable. Herbert G. Esquireras, First Secretary, United States Legation, Peking. The blind trust the ministers, with the exception perhaps of M. Pichon, placed in the promises of the Tsang Liamen, in the face of the daily increasing riots and murder, is an instance of childlike simplicity which I trust they may never have an opportunity to repeat elsewhere. The entire community here, of civilians and military alike, condemn them as a set of incompetents. They now, of course, all see their mistake in being fooled by the Tsang Liamen, and prevented from bringing a sufficient force here until the railroad was destroyed and hordes of fierce Kansu ruffians placed in the way of advancing relief. The Marines of the Newark and Oregon, of which we have 50, that compose the entire American force, are a sturdy lot of courageous, devoted men. Sober, intelligent, cheerful, enduring, all of them are as brave as lions. Sergeant Walker alone, at the South Cathedral, killed 7 of the Boxers. The district held by us is about a half-mile east and west on Legation Street, and is guarded by blocking the streets at the Italian Legation on the east and the Russian Legation on the west. At each barricade there is placed a machine gun. A diagram of the ground held will be found on another page. June 19th, yesterday, the Tsang Liamen ministers, 4 of them, visited the English, Russian, and American legations, and begged the foreign ministers to persuade the relief guards that we hope are coming to our aid, to return, assuring them that from this time on the Chinese would prevent any further Boxer outrages on foreigners, and that legation premises should be safe. They also said the Empress was now sure that the Boxer movement was a menace to the government as well as the foreigners, and that the imperial troops would be ordered to shoot every Boxer on sight. As all the afternoon our sentinels on the city wall saw Boxers in full regalia going at pleasure among the native troops stationed about the ruined Qian men, we know that the Tsang Liamen's words were, as usual, a pack of lies. A messenger arrived yesterday from Tientsin from Mr. E. B. Drew, Commissioner of Customs, to Dr. Morrison of the London Times, stating that the railroad had been destroyed in the rear of the relief column, and they were being driven back on Tientsin and away from us. Surely our condition is desperate. Food is getting scarce. Boxers are mixing openly with the Chinese soldiers. Our own soldier boys are getting worn out by constant watching, and no help is nigh. July 18th. On June 19th, nearly a month ago today, the Tsang Liamen sent the foreign ministers word that, as the admirals at Taku had notified the Viceroy of Chile through the French consul if he opposed troops landing in any required numbers they would take the Taku forts, and as this was really a declaration of war, the foreign ministers were hereby requested to leave Peking, one and all within 24 hours, and proceed to Tientsin en route to their respective countries. A Chinese escort for, which was to be provided by the Chinese government, as the railroad had already been destroyed all the way to Tientsin, and the intended relief corps under Admiral Seymour and Captain McCalla had been driven back without being able to reach us, and as we knew the country between Peking and Tientsin was filled with thousands of Boxers and hostile soldiers, it seemed patent to the most simple intellect that to leave the protection of our legation walls was to invite massacre. But the intensely dense ministers, Sir Claude MacDonald, E.H. Conger, M. de Geers, M. Pichon, and others, all excepting Baron von Ketteler, the German minister, actually agreed to proceed to Tientsin on the morrow with all their nationals, providing only that the Chinese government would furnish transportation. The military officers all declared this would mean the massacre of the entire community. The ministers, however, would certainly have had us all thus massacred, had not the unfortunate Baron von Ketteler been murdered the next morning by the Chinese troops while proceeding to the Tsang Liamen to consult about details. He rode, as is customary, to the Tsungli Yamen from his legation in a sedan chair. When passing the entrance of Tsungpu Street, just below the Yamen, he was fired upon by a troop of Manchu troops of young Liu upon the command of a lieutenant with a white button, and was mortally wounded. His secretary interpreter, Mr. Corder, who accompanied him, was also badly wounded by the volley, but, aided by some friendly natives, managed to escape to the Methodist mission near Legation Street, where, after having his wounds dressed, he was sent on to his legation. The horse coolie had already quickly galloped back to the legation and given the alarm. The folly of trusting our lives to the Chinese escort was thus made clear, and the foreign ministers, dense as they were, could not but realize that to trust themselves and their families to the tender mercies of the ruffians who would be appointed to escort and murder them and us, would be lunacy to a degree at which even they were not yet arrived. I had, in company with the correspondent of the London Times, early in the morning of the 20th of June, in the most emphatic language, represented the true state of the case to Minister Conger, only to be met with the cold reply, as he turned away after listening to us, "I don't agree with you." But on receipt of the news of Kettler's death, a few moments later, the United States minister changed his mind, and reluctantly admitted it would be impossible to go to Tientsin, and that we must try and defend ourselves in Peking until a large relief force could arrive to rescue us. Hasty preparations were then made to send all the women and children into the English legation, which was the largest of all the legations, as well as the strongest, from which to make a final stand. In a few hours after the news of von Kettler's murder, a steady stream of men, women, and children, carrying bundles, buckets, and trunks, could have been seen pouring into the main gate of the British legation, all with anxious faces. Carts, too, loaded with provisions from the 3 foreign stores, were making the best use of the time in transferring all the available eatables and drinkables within the protection of the legation walls. As the 24 hours granted us in which to hasten from the city expired at 4 p.m., all used their entire energy as well as that of the coolies and servants at their disposal, so that at the time specified, when the Chinese opened a terrifying fire upon us from all sides, provisions enough to last us several months were safely under shelter. Chapter 5 Diaries of the Author and His Son from June 20th to End of Siege. HSII Young I beheaded for favoring moderation. Member of Tsungli Yamen at 4 o'clock on the afternoon of June 20th, 1900, all the foreign women and children, and nearly all of the civilians of Peking and vicinity, including the customs staff and the missionary body, had taken refuge in the British legation. It was surprising to everyone to find that, in the time that had elapsed since the arrival of the British Marines, May 31st, no barricades had been erected, no trenches dug, nor any attention paid whatever to rendering the place better able to stand a siege. In talking with one of the British sergeants, and commenting upon this utter neglect, he informed me that Captain Halliday had, a few days before, attempted to improvise some barriers by means of dry goods boxes filled with earth, but had been so laughed at and snubbed by Captain Strouts and Ray, British officers, that he had given up the attempt. Sir Claude MacDonald, the British minister, who is an ex-major in the army, and should have instructed in this very important duty, was, equally with Marine officers, culpably silent. The American missionaries, however, no sooner arrived than they formed committees on fortification, sanitation, food, etc., and set actively to work. And to them belongs, as everyone agrees, the credit of placing the legation in a defensible condition. To Mr. F. D. Gamewell of the American Methodist Mission, more than to any other one man, is due the success which has attended our defense. His energy was simply extraordinary. From morning until night he was to be seen superintending the filling of sandbags, the tearing down of houses adjoining our walls that might serve as cover to the enemy, the building of barricades and strengthening of walls from the timbers and brick so obtained, making loopholes at the proper places for firing through and doing, in fact, everything that could have been done by an army engineer of experience. All the time, too, under a galling rifle fire from the outside Chinese army, under the command of the Kansu ruffian General Tung Fu Xiang. All the Chinese coolies, servants, cooks, and retainers of the foreigners, to the number of over 1,000, were enrolled, given a badge sewed to their sleeves, declaring their identity, and hours fixed for their employment on public works for general defense. Latrines and garbage tanks were arranged, and the place put under proper sanitary regulation, supervised by Drs. Coltman, Lowry, and Inglis. A hospital was equipped under Drs. Velde and Poole, and a trained nurse corps installed, consisting of several lady physicians and 3 trained nurses. The Holland and Belgian legations, being outside of the line of defense adopted by consultation of the military captains, were abandoned, but it was decided by the military to hold the French, German, American, Italian, and Russian legations until absolutely untenable. With the exception of the Italian legation, these premises are still in our possession, although the French and German legations are but shattered wrecks, every building being full of holes from shells and round shot of the Chinese cannon, often fired at only 200 yards distance. Building barricades in German legation without the barricades, the defense would never have been successful. Some very hard fighting was done in the vicinity of this barricade. The lower portion was built of brick, with sandbags on top and loopholes left for the purpose of rifle firing. On the afternoon of that first day of the siege, Hubert E. James, professor of English in the Imperial University, noticed several Chinese soldiers upon the bridge, a few hundred yards north of the legation gate. Without stating his motive to anyone, although it is supposed he intended to converse with them, and, if possible, find out their orders in regard to us, he walked from the gate up the street along the canal to the bridge. He had no sooner arrived there than several Chinese soldiers, concealed behind the wall of Prince Su's palace, fired upon him. The sentry at the legation gate saw him hold up his hands, then heard a report and saw him fall. He was seen to partly raise himself, when several of the ruffian soldiers hurriedly ran out, picked him up and carried him behind the corner of the wall and beyond the reach of rescue. His fate was probably a hasty death at their hands, if, indeed, he was not already mortally wounded. When I heard of this sad affair, an hour after its occurrence, I could scarcely believe that my friend who had welcomed me to China in 1885 had come to such a cruel end. He had not an enemy in the world, and was uniformly gentle and considerate. His fate, following so closely upon Baron von Ketteler's, the first day of our siege, cast a deep gloom over the entire community. Promptly at 4 p.m. the Chinese soldiers opened fire upon all the legations from behind the surrounding houses. But very fortunately for us, most of their bullets flew high and went entirely over the legation district and must have injured Chinese residents in Peking at a distance. The British legation inside presented a scene of greatest confusion. Eatables and tin stores of every description had been hastily dumped by coolies into all parts of the compound. Men, women, and children were busy for some hours trying to identify and collect the little stores they had brought or sent in, with the idea that a few days' provision would be all that would be necessary, as no one believed that Admiral Seymour, Colonel Wagach, and Captain McCalla would be longer than a week at most in relieving us. Little did we imagine that many weeks of siege under shot, shell, and rifle fire must be endured, with absolutely no word from the outside world, before we, or at least such of us as survived, would again come forth. Many had left their homes hurriedly, taking with them nothing but the clothes they wore. Having left my own house 1 week previous, and gone to the United States legation as a guest with my family, I had been requested not to bring in any supply of provisions, as it would alarm people, and it was hoped quiet would be restored in a few days. When obliged by the Chinese ultimatum to leave Peking or, as we decided after Baron von Ketteler's murder, to take refuge in the British legation and await reinforcements, it was too late to visit my home outside of the foreign lines and remove anything from my storeroom. Fortunately for my little family, Mr. H.G. Squires, as I have mentioned, had laid in an abundant supply of rice, flour, and other stores, and he offered, if I would undertake to move all his stores safely to the British legation, to contribute to my needs. This I was only too glad to do. So, taking 2 of his servants and the only 2 of mine who, out of 9, had remained faithful, I worked from 9 a.m. until 4 p.m. removing Squire's stores to the British legation. View from the wall of Peking showing scene of the blockade and other points of special interest. 1. The prominent building at this point is the British legation, practically the headquarters of the defense. 2. This high wall, extending the entire length of the picture, marks the boundary of the Forbidden City. At the point indicated, the Krupp guns, mentioned in the narrative, were mounted, giving them a sweeping range of Legation Street. 3. The residence of the author after the siege, his own property having been so badly damaged by the mob as to make it untenantable. 4. The roof of the American legation, in another picture, is shown a view of the legation itself. 5. The Russian legation, another of the most important points in the foreign field of defense. 6. Bridge over the canal at Legation Street. The foul and stagnant water in the canal and the filth in its bed are plainly shown. 7. The roofs of the Emperor's Palace and Forbidden City and other portions of some of the buildings appear above the wall that surrounds it. It will be noticed that, while strictly barred out from the Forbidden City and the Palace of the Emperor, the foreign legations were nevertheless within a comparatively short distance. 8. The top of what is known as the Coal Hill, in the imperial grounds of the Forbidden City, shows over the top of the wall. This hill is a vast supply of coal, which has been accumulating for hundreds of years. It is entirely without shelter, and there seems to be no authentic history to account for its inception, nor any special reason for its continuance. But here, in the most sacred place in the Chinese kingdom, right in the magnificent palace grounds of the emperor, this ugly, unsightly pile of coal, covering several acres in extent and rising, as can be seen by the picture, to a very considerable height, washed by the rains and seamed by the upheavals of the frosts of winter, continues to exist, as it has done from time immemorial. I purchased also from one of the foreign stores within the lines of defense 24 tins of condensed milk and 4 tins of baked beans. A very inadequate provision to feed 6 children and 2 adults for 2 months. Many others were as poorly provided for as myself. But providentially, within the region we had adopted as our lines of defense, were several large grain shops full of rice, wheat, and millet. Our carts were kept busy for several days hauling these supplies into the English legation, where they were placed in charge of a commissary officer and issued out as needed. We thus had sufficient grain, not only for all the foreigners, but also for the 2,000-odd refugees, coolies, and servants, who had, from one motive or another, cast their lot with us. From the grain shops, too, we brought in their millstones, and, as we had altogether over 150 mules and horses, we started up a 10-mule-power mill, which ground out flour all day for the needs of the besieged. Being occupied daily with the sanitary work and attendance on the sick, I was unable to keep much of a diary, so I instructed my son Robert, aged 16, to do so for me, and the following transcription of his diary gives the events of our daily life until the end of the siege. June 21st. Most of the Chinese coolies and many foreigners were set right at work filling sandbags for fortifying all the weak places in the legation, while the women, with needle and thread and the few sewing machines inside the compound, manufactured the bags by the thousand. This was kept up until 20,000 to 25,000 sandbags were made. The Belgian legation and the Methodist mission were set fire to and completely burned. Tung Lu's troops kept up a desultory fusillade upon us all day, but scarcely any of the bullets took effect. It was reported that Prince Qing's troops were firing on the Boxers, who were attacking the customs compound and Austrian legation. This report was afterward proved false. The French were driven from their barricade in the customs lane into the French legation compound. The Chinese set fire to a native house just in the rear of Mr. Coburn's house, hoping it would catch to the latter place. It was very near, and, as the wind was strong, was only prevented with the greatest difficulty from spreading into the legation. It was put out at last after 2 hours hard fighting. Some of the Marines stationed as watchmen on the roof of the Cockburn house had seen Chinamen sneaking around with rags soaked in kerosene and had fired on them, but had not succeeded in preventing the fire being set. The Austrians, Italians, Germans, and Japanese were forced by the heavy firing to leave their legations and come here. The Americans also started but were sent back. The Austrians and Italians were never able to retake their legations, but the Germans and Japanese returned very shortly to theirs. The Germans found a Boxer prisoner missing on their return on the 23rd of June. A fire was started just outside the north wall of the compound at 10 a.m., which was put out or thought to have been put out. But it broke out again in the afternoon, this time burning a part of the Hanlon Library, adjoining the legation on the north. The conflagration was separated from the legation by only one narrow court, so one of the buildings in the court was pulled down to prevent its spreading. Thousands of wooden printing blocks were thrown into the fire to get rid of all combustible material in the immediate neighborhood. These blocks represent days of labor each and were used in printing valuable to the Chinese books. Many valuable books also perished in the flames. At night, a guard was placed in the Hanlin Yuan or garden to watch the smoking remains. And, as this point is of greatest strategic importance, barricades will be erected here and the position maintained. June 22nd. The customs compound and Austrian legation were burned, the Austrians remaining in the French legation to help them there. The back part of the Russo-Chinese bank compound was burned, also a house in the Japanese legation, which latter fire was soon subdued. A discharge of shrapnel from a gun on the city wall struck the gatehouse of the United States legation and cut down the flagpole, tearing a large hole in the roof, but hurting no one. At 7 p.m. a house near the Hotel de Pain was burned. In this house 2 boxers were captured. When seen, they threw down their swords and attempted to escape, but were caught and brought into the British legation to be locked up. The fortifying operations are being pushed forward vigorously under the excellent management of Mr. F. D. Gamewell. He is the one man competent to take charge of affairs here as the British, although in their own legation, and knowing that the place was to be the last place of refuge, had not done a stroke of work toward fortifying it, and seemed to be as helpless as children. Portion of China's Great Wall showing one of the towers or forts, which are built at intervals throughout its entire length. June 24th. At 10 minutes past midnight, the Chinese began a furious fusillade from all quarters, and an alarm was rung from the bell tower, notifying all of a general attack. But after about 20 minutes of prodigious noise, with almost no damage done, the firing ceased as suddenly as it had commenced, and the rest of the night was comparatively quiet. About 10 a.m. a fire was started outside and adjoining the south stables, which, after heroic exertions upon the part of nearly the entire garrison of men, women, and coolies, all of whom formed into line and passed hundreds of buckets of water from the 2 nearest wells to the scene of the fire, was subdued without our stables catching fire. With every one of these fires that was successfully put out, the danger from that source was lessened. The German and American Marines took possession of the city wall south of their respective legations, to prevent the Chinese from bringing their heavy guns too near and too directly able to bear upon the legations. Thrice they were driven back by the heavy fire, but they stuck to their task and eventually obtained each a position on the wall, the Germans to the east, the Americans to the west, the 2 positions being about 600 yards apart. The second time they advanced, the Americans took the Colt machine gun with them, and, advancing almost to the Chinese barricade, killed several hundred Chinese. The third time, the Americans advanced several hundred yards and then retreated suddenly, as though panic-stricken. This brought the Chinese out from behind their barricades with a rush, when the Colt gun was again turned loose on them and killed 60 more. After this, the shelling got so hot that the position became absolutely untenable. A piece of shell struck the shoulder piece of the Colt gun, and another shell, striking the wall, knocked down the bricks so thickly around the gun that Mitchell, the gunner, thought he might have to abandon it. But hastily taking it apart, he managed to get it down the ramp and brought it safely into the British legation. The German officers claimed to have seen rockets to the southwest, which they thought to be signals from the relief force. Heavy cannonading was also heard, about 4 p.m. outside the city, which was thought to come from the troops, but both proved false hopes. Corporal King, United States Marine Corps, was killed by a Chinese sniper in the Russo-Chinese bank. The United States barracks were set on fire, but fortunately the fire did not spread to the legation. Captain Halliday, Royal Navy Marine Corps, was severely wounded by a stray bullet. 13 men are in the hospital. June 25th. During the night, one of the captured boxers tried to escape, so in the morning they were both shot. There was about 20 minutes of hot firing about the same time as last night. At 5 p.m. the Chinese put up a poster on the North Bridge ordering the firing to stop, and to protect the ministers, stating also that they would send us a message. This message was never sent, however, and though the firing was stopped for a few hours, it soon started up again, and the whole thing was believed to be a fraud by which the Chinese wished to get some of the foreigners outside the legation to be killed. Entrance through Great Wall into Mongolia. Rotating gate. This Great Wall extends in massive proportions over more than 1,000 miles of plain and mountain. It was built ages ago as a bar against the incursions of the barbaric and warlike tribes, who were destined in time, despite this tremendous obstacle, to overrun and acquire the kingdom and place their own rulers upon its throne. The Americans and Germans again took their positions on the wall, and began building barricades in the face of the Chinese gun. As the mutton began to get scarce, the first horse was killed. It was very good eating, and I doubt not that we have had some of that kind of beef before in substitution for the genuine article. 3 rockets, probably Chinese, were seen during the night. June 26th. The night entertainment, fireworks, came at 3 a.m. Instead of midnight. As usual, Chinese troops were seen marching northwest, supposedly to convey the Empress to the Summer Palace. By this time, the shells from the various guns close by us began to come nearer, several exploding in the compound. Bomb-proof cellars were therefore started in different parts of the compound, in which we might take refuge if the shells actually began to do damage. These bomb-proofs were trenches about 6 feet deep, covered with a roof of timbers, boards, and from 2 to 4 feet of earth or sandbags. These, it was thought, would furnish efficient protection against fragments of shell. Sergeant Fanning, United States Marine Corps, was killed by a sniper on the city wall. June 27th. Very heavy firing, mostly from the Imperial City wall. A crowd of greenhorn boxers started to attack the Americans on the wall from below. The Americans turned the Colt on them, killing about 50, and the rest got away. A Chinaman who arrived from near Tientsin reported boxers very thick around there, and that 3 divisions of troops had left Tientsin June 24th to come to Peking, 1 coming north, 1 west, and 1 east. June 28th. No news of importance. June 29th. In the morning there was an attack made by the Chinese on the South Stables, the weakest part of the whole legation compound. This was repulsed after a short fight, and about 20 British Marines under Captain Strauss went out after the Chinese, killing a large number of them, and capturing their rifles with about 600 rounds of ammunition. The guns were mostly Mauser rifles and carbines. They were distributed among the unarmed men of the legation. Captain Strauss was grazed in the neck by a bullet. Later 50 volunteers under Captain Ray went out to capture a gun near the Su Wang Fu that was making things unpleasant for the people there. They could not find it, however, and had to return. By this time, nearly all the Chinese houses near the United States legation had been burned in the various attempts to fire the legation, and in the ruins of these houses a number of Chinese snipers installed themselves, making it extremely dangerous for anyone attempting to cross Legation Street. June 30th. At night there was a very heavy thunderstorm, the first of the rainy season. Simultaneously with the thunder, the Chinese started a terrific fusillade from all quarters. The hideous noise, with the vivid flashes of lightning and the torrents of rain, produced an effect on the minds of all who witnessed it that they will probably never forget. July 1st. The Americans and Germans were forced by heavy shell fire to leave the wall. Later in the day the Americans returned, but the Germans did not. The Chinese were quiet at night, there being hardly any firing at all. The reason for this was supposed to be temporary shortness of ammunition. At night, a good many people believed they saw flashes from an electric searchlight, which was supposed to be with the troops at Tungchau. They claimed to have seen at first 40 flashes, then an interval followed by 8 more. This they supposed to be some kind of a signal to us, but since it has all turned out to be heat lightning. Ed. Wagner, one of the customs men, was struck and killed in the French legation by a shell. July 2nd. It rained at night, and no flashlights were seen. July 3rd. The Chinese on the wall had built up their barricade so high during the night that it almost overlooked our own. The two were only 40 yards apart, and had they been able to build a little higher they might easily have fired right down on our men, so that it became a question of rushing the Chinese barricade or of leaving the wall. The former course was adopted. At 3 a.m., 15 United States Marines, 15 Russian sailors, and 25 British Marines, led by Captain John Myers, in the blackest part of the night, crept silently over the American barricade, and, dividing into 2 parties, each keeping close to either side of the wall battlements, advanced rapidly right up to the face of the Chinese barricade undiscovered. Arrived here as agreed, they gave a tremendous yell, and swarmed over and around the barricade, yelling and firing volleys into the astonished Celestials, who, taken entirely by surprise by the yelling foreign devils, made very little resistance, and speedily fled to their second line of defense, some distance westward toward the Chien men. Before starting, Captain Myers had briefly addressed his men, telling them the vital necessity of capturing the barricade. Men, he said. We must take that place at all costs or be driven off the wall. Once off the wall, the legations will lie at the mercy of the Chinese. And we, with all the women and children, will be butchered. This is our opportunity. I expect every man to do his duty. We cannot stop to pick up any who may be wounded, but must press on and accomplish the work, leaving the wounded until we return. If I fall, Sergeant Murphy of the British Marines succeeds to command. If he falls, Corporal Hunt of the American Marines succeeds him. Now, when I give command, spring over the barricade and follow me. He immediately gave the command, "Come on." The sortie was most successful, the barricade was gained and held, but we lost two brave American boys, Privates Turner and Thomas. Captain Myers was badly wounded by a spear thrust in his knee, and Corporal Gregory of the British Marines was shot in the foot. July 4th, Independence Day in America, but a day of red-hot fireworks for us. Chinese butchers on the outside trying hard to get in and murder us. Only celebration by Americans was a party given to the smaller children by Mrs. Squires. July 5th, Mr. David Oliphant, one of the English legation students, was shot and mortally wounded in the Hanlin Yuan. He died at 3 and was buried in our little graveyard at 7 p.m. His death threw a deep gloom over the whole legation, as he was a general favorite. 3 attacks were made on us last night at 10 and 12, and 2:30 this morning. Cartridge ammunition of the enemy seems to be running low, as they are firing now more of the old muzzle-loading Yingals, and fewer of the Mauser cartridges. July 6th, a sortie was made by the Japanese to try and capture a gun that was making havoc on their barricades in the Suwangfu. Too many Chinese houses, however, concealed the whereabouts of the gun, and after having 3 men wounded, they were obliged to return unsuccessful. A shell fell in one of the rooms of Mr. Conger's house, doing considerable damage. Mrs. Conger had been in the room only a short time before. On the Great Wall, Kuan-Ming, who a messenger was let down from the wall with ropes to try and communicate our desperate situation to Tientsin. He was offered 1,000 taels if he got safely through the enemy's lines with his dispatches. We have sent numerous runners out by the water gate and several over the wall, but none have ever returned. Doubtless they have been captured and killed. During the day, a number of 3 and 7 pound solid iron shot have been thrown into our midst by guns located on the wall of the Imperial, or Yellow City, to the north of us. So far, beyond knocking a few holes in the buildings, they have done no harm. The powder they are using must be very inferior. One of the missiles passed through Lady MacDonald's dining room. July 7th. 2 attacks were made on the French legation and were repulsed, the Chinese loss being small, as they retired rapidly. The Austrian commander, Captain von Thornebig, was killed in one of these attacks, being shot through the heart. We are now really eating the horse meat. A number of people who were using it assured us it was very good, but our prejudices prevailed some time. First we tried the liver, fried with a small scrap of bacon, and were pleased to find it tasted just like beef liver. Then we tried some of the meat curried, and now we are having excellent sausages of the meat, which helps the rice to be more palatable. We are allowed 1 pound of horse meat per adult individual each day. When the Russians came up the first time, they brought along with them 60 shells, leaving the gun in Tientsin to be brought up by the next force that came. As no other could get in, the ammunition was of no use. It was thought that if some kind of a cannon could be made, many of our shells might be utilized in destroying the Chinese barricades. So Mitchell, the United States gunner, started to work on 2 sections of a fire engine pump. Meanwhile, 2 Chinese coolies found an old cannon, a muzzle loader of about 1860, in a junk shop and dragged it in. As this cannon fitted the shells, it was used instead of the pump. It was mounted on a pair of wheels taken from the Italian ammunition truck. It has been nicknamed the International. The gun itself was an old British one, mounted on an Italian carriage, and fired with Russian ammunition by an American gunner. Hence the nickname. The ammunition for the Italian 1-pound gun having run short, pewter vessels from the Chinese houses around were brought in, melted, and run into molds to make the shot for the gun. With these the used cartridges were reloaded, and, there being no primers for them, revolver cartridges were readily used instead. When tried in the bore they worked very well. though it was feared that the harder metal of which they were made would be ruinous to the rifling of the gun. The Chinese broke 2 holes in the top of the imperial city wall and built a platform just over the water gate, where it was expected they would mount guns the next night. At 10 p.m. they started a fusillade, which lasted for a few minutes, but the rest of the night was fairly quiet. The French and Austrians claimed to have heard cannonading about 10 kilometers, 6 miles, to the southeast. But this has also proved a false hope, and the general opinion is now that the relief has not started from Tientsin at all, though why, no one can say. July 8th, Sunday. The Chinese on the wall moved up their arms and opened fire on our barricade. The third shot they fired was badly aimed and struck their own barricade, carrying most of it away, when they were forced to retreat in a hurry. There was a fire at the Su Wang Fu of the main pavilion buildings, but it was not very serious. 2 shells from a gun to the west struck the wall, and one the top of Mr. Coburn's house, showing that the Chinese are getting the range. The evening fusillade started at 9:45 and lasted about 20 minutes. July 9th. In the morning Mr. Squires sent out a man into the city to see what was going on there. He returned in the afternoon reporting, first, that Hatamen has been closed for many days. Second, that there are no Chinese troops in the southern city. Third, that Runglu's troops are guarding the Chihamen, but there are many Kansu men on the Hatamen streets and in the imperial city. Fourth, that at the Sepelu for arches, the shops are open and doing business as usual. Fifth, that the Emperor and Empress Dowager are still in the city. Sixth, that the Peking Gazette is published daily. The day was quiet except for occasional firing. July 10th. In the morning several of the Chinese shells came very close, breaking right over the tennis court, and making it unsafe for anyone to cross. July 11th. A messenger sent out with a letter tried to get through the water gate, but was immediately fired on by the Chinese sentries and forced to fly. He got in without being hurt. The Chinese were extremely quiet all night, but the cause was not known until the next morning, when it was discovered that they had built 2 new big walls, one in the Hanlin Yuan and another in the Imperial Carriage Park. Part of author's diary, July 12th. The Chinese kept up a heavy cannonade all day, mostly from the guns on the Imperial City wall, but did very little damage to us. A flag, white ground and black characters, was captured by the French in the morning, and in the afternoon Mitchell captured a big black one in the Hanlin Yuan. He got up on a Chinese barrier and wrested the flag from a Chinese soldier by pounding him with sandbags until he let go, while 5 or 6 volleys were fired at him. He secured the flag and got down without a scratch. July 13th. A Chinese prisoner taken by the French Marines this morning states that the Emperor and Empress Dowager are still in the palace here. Prince Tuan, Yong Li and General Tung are in control of public affairs. Prince Qing takes no part in them. Many boxers are still in the city. Their principal patron is Prince Tuan. In his palace they are registered, fed and paid. These boxers are ridiculed by the soldiers because they dare not go under fire at the front, in spite of their pretensions to be bulletproof. General Tung's troops are facing us on the wall and along our lines on the south. Yong Lu's troops are behind the French legation. Several of them are killed or wounded every day. The prisoner declares that he was one of several coolies, hired at 25 cents a body, to carry off and bury the dead. There are about 3,000 of Tung Fu Sinang's troops in the city. The Empress has forbidden the use of guns of large caliber against us, because of the harm they might do to her loyal people and their houses. Direct attack having failed and our rifles being better than theirs, it has been decided to starve us out. 2 weeks ago news came that foreign troops from 100 warships at Taku had captured the Taku forts and occupied East Taku, opposite Tangku railway station. Tientsin City was in a panic on this account. Ammunition is being brought here from the hunting park. Imperial edicts are issued as usual. Business is going on in the north part of the city, and market supplies are coming in. The 4 chief banks are closed. The soldiers believe that we have several thousand troops under arms here. The prisoner thought we had at least 2,000. Of course, this information is not official, and there may be much that is not strictly accurate. It simply represents the gossip of the tea shops and restaurants. One reason the Chinese have for thinking we have so many men here is that a number of them are killed by their own bullets. which are aimed high and pass over our heads and drop among their own people. This shooting they attribute to our men, and so think we have a large force here. Same date, 6:30 p.m., the Chinese exploded a mine under the French legation wall, destroying part of the wall and also part of their own fortifications. 4 men were buried by the first explosion, one of whom was dug out, and another blown up again by a second explosion. Having done this, the Chinese made a desperate assault, but were beaten off after having killed 3 and wounded 3 French Marines and lost about 20 of their number. View in Legation Street. The entrance to French legation is on the left. The lions shown on either side of the entrance are such as can be found nowhere outside of China. The street is in somewhat better condition, since it is presumably under foreign control, or at least is modified by foreign influences. The ministers' and first secretaries' houses were fired, the minister destroying all his official papers himself, to prevent their falling into the hands of the Chinese. Simultaneously with this attack came a tremendous fusillade from all sides, which lasted 45 minutes, by far the longest we have had yet. The Su Wangfu was the scene of the hottest firing, and once it was thought it would have to be given up. At the same time, a body of Chinese, numbering about 200, charged down the Wall Street and got past the German legation without being stopped. When they got to the bridge, one of the United States Marines was just coming down from the wall and saw them as they were coming up over the bridge. He gave the alarm to 4 men stationed in the barricade on the street, who fired about a dozen volleys on them, killing 30 of them. The natives then turned and fled. On the way back, the Germans fired on them, driving them into the club tennis courts, where they killed 18 more. The officer in command of the Chinese was shot by E. von Strauch, captain of the customs volunteers. In the fray, 2 Germans were seriously and 2 slightly wounded. The Chinese kept up a desultory firing all night. July 14th, a large supply of wheat was brought over to the British legation from a grain store near the South Bridge, and distributed in several storerooms throughout the compound. This was done as there had been some burning near there, and it was feared it would be destroyed. A messenger sent out by Mr. Tewkesbury on the 10th instant returned, bringing a message supposed to have been written by Prince Ching. It was soon known to be an invitation to leave the legations and go to the Liamen for protection, though the full translation was not put upon the bulletin board till the next day, July 15th. The following bulletin was posted at 1 p.m. A messenger sent out on July 10th by Mr. Tewkesbury, with a letter for the troops returned yesterday. He is the gatekeeper at the Nanvang South Cathedral, and a Roman Catholic. He says he was arrested outside the Hatamen and taken to the Wofersu temple. His letter was taken from him and he was beaten with 80 blows. He was then taken to Yung Lu's headquarters in the imperial city. Here he found a man named Yu who formerly knew him as gatekeeper. He was there given a letter, purporting to be written by Prince Ching and others, addressed to the British minister, and told that men would wait at the Watergate tonight for an answer. A translation of the letter is annexed. For the last 10 days the soldiers and militia have been fighting, and there has been no communication between us, to our great anxiety. Some time ago we hung up a board referring to June 25th, expressing our intentions, but no answer has been received, and, contrary to expectation, the foreign soldiers made renewed attacks, causing alarm and suspicion among people and soldiers. Yesterday the troops captured a convert named Chin Su Hai, and learned from him that the foreign ministers were all well, which caused us great satisfaction. But it is the unexpected that happens. The reinforcements of foreign troops were ever so long ago stopped and turned back by the Boxers, and if, in accordance with the previous agreement, we were to guard your excellencies out of the city, there are so many Boxers on the Tiansintaku road that we should be very apprehensive of misadventure. We now request your excellencies to first take your families and the various members of your staff and leave your legations in detachments. You should select trustworthy officers to give close and strict protection, and you should temporarily reside in the Liamen, pending future arrangements for your return home in order to preserve friendly relations intact from beginning to end. But at the time of leaving the legations there must on no account whatever be any single armed foreign soldier, in order to prevent doubt and fear on the part of the troops and people, leading to untoward incidents. If your excellency is willing to show this confidence, we beg you to communicate with all the foreign ministers in Peking, tomorrow at noon being the limit of time, and to let the original messenger deliver your reply, in order that we may settle in advance the day for leaving the legations. This is the single way of preserving relations that we have been able to devise in the face of innumerable difficulties. If no reply is received by the hour fixed, even our affection will not enable us to help you. Compliments, Prince Ching and others. 6th moon, 18th day, July 13th, 1900. A reply has been sent today declining, on the part of the foreign representatives, the invitation to proceed to the Zhongliamen, and pointing out that no attacks have been made by our troops, who are only defending the lives and property of foreigners against the attacks of Chinese government troops. The reply concludes with a statement that if the Chinese government wishes to negotiate, they should send a responsible official with a white flag.